Hello everyone, welcome to your session. So let's just run through what we'll be looking at today. So we'll be looking at the success stories. So the questions and topics that students did well in. We'll look at the areas of focus where the scores were not so good. For each of those, we'll also have some key advice from examiners in their reports, and we'll be looking at the grade boundaries and the overall performance. And at the end, we'll also show some further support materials that you can use for yourselves, for your students, to make sure next year they get the best grades possible. Don't forget, we can access lots of material in the Maths Emporium. So if you want access, you need to ask your exams officer to set you up with an Edexcel online account. So if you're not registered, do that ASAP. And once you've got your online account, you can log in or register for your account and access all the material we have to offer. So it'd be very, very useful for you to have these materials open up. So the exam paper, the source booklet, the mark schemes for both of the papers, just to have that open up. So these links will take you to those areas in the Maths Emporium. So if you've got access to those, please get them open. It will be useful. I'll be showing some of the exam questions and a few responses during the session. I won't be displaying the mark schemes because they're quite detailed and quite full. So if you want to look at the mark schemes, have those open at the same time as we go through some questions. There won't be responses to every single question we're talking about, but we will look at a few of them. These links hopefully will also be in the chat as well, and you can also access them from the Pearson website if you haven't got the Emporium links available. So find them on the Pearson website. Okay, so let's first of all talk about what went well. So in paper one, which was the comprehension paper, if we look at the questions that, from what I could see from the data, were very, very good questions. We've got question 1A, part 2, that was about calculate percentage decrease. We've got 5A, which was drawing a community frequency curve from a table. 6A, part 1, was calculating the mean from the source document text. So they had to go into the source document, take relevant text from there, and use that to calculate a correct mean. Question 7 was interpreting the box plot and finding equal to a range. And 9I was calculating the spin means rank college, which obviously is a new topic. So again, that's quite a good thing there. So we can look at their mean scores. We can see that what the max scores for each one. Again, if you look, I like to look at the C grade score. So if we look at the question 1A, it was out of 2. The C grades are getting an average of 1.6. So these were good questions. Okay, even the D and E grades were doing quite well in those questions. You can get all this results data from the Maths Emporium from this link. So let's look at questions 5A and 7 here, and we can see exam report as well. So question 5, we've got this community frequency table given to us, and they were given a grid to draw the community frequency graph. We know the sort of errors that these sort of students tend to make mistakes. Sometimes they plot in the midpoints, sometimes they don't put in the correct place. Because this was a familiar question, most gained the marks to be able to draw the community frequency graph. Okay, so as always, some did plot the midpoints, rather bound, but generally it was well. Question 7, we've got a box plot. We've also got a couple of crosses there to show some outliers. So again, many candidates, probably only 3 marks assigned to box plots. They are quite comfortable with it. The majority gained the 1 mark in part A, recognise that those are outliers, and a good number also gained both marks in part B for the correct estimate of integral to range. The scale, however, on the box plot proved a little more challenging for some, so they did lose some marks. So again, making sure students can read off these sort of scales, should they cover that, make sure they understand what what the crosses mean, and each section of the box is important. And this year they did well on that question. So look at paper 2, which is the applications paper. So again, looking at those mean percentages on these scores, again, these were good questions. So question 1, we've got about plotting, describing scatter graphs, reading from scatter graph. Question 3 was about compound depreciation. For 5B, they had to complete a Venn diagram. And question 10, they had to set up and solve some simultaneous equations. And again, all this data is available from the Emporium. So again, looking at those lower grades and the maximum scores, we can see, yeah, they were good questions. Okay, even the D and E grade students did quite well on those questions. So let's look at question 5. So this is about completing a Venn diagram. We've got 500 male trout, 500 female trout in a lake. We've got about the amounts that weigh less than 1 kilo or less than 40 centimeters, etc. And they had to complete the Venn diagram from that information. And we can see students' ability to complete the Venn diagram was assessed in part B. Majority of students gained at least 2 marks of 4 available, with many awarded 4 marks. The most common error was to not include the value of 228 in the outer region. So we've actually got a response for this question. So let's take a look at that now. And don't forget, you can access the mark scheme from these links. So we can see they've been obviously ticking off each bit of information, which was a good thing to do. They've made it very clear what each of the letter stands for. Plenty of work out. We've got the values of 31 and 269 are incorrect in this Venn diagram, but the other values are correct. Therefore, there is 4 regions correct. Therefore, we can give them 3 marks. So out of the 4 marks, they got 3. So even though there were some incorrect values, there are 4 correct regions. So that gave them 3 out of 4 marks. Let's now look at question 10. This was the simplified equation question. So again, it's a wordy question. We've got a farmer makes and sells cream and yogurts to shops. We've got the owner of shop A buys 20 pots of cream, 8 trays of yogurts. It costs £81.12. Owner of shop B buys 14 pots of cream, 9 trays of yogurts. That costs £76.47. What we've got to do is work out the total cost of shop C. So they bought 32 pots of cream and 30 trays of yogurts. So again, the competent examiner, very pleased to see a much larger expected number of students attempt this question with a greater success than the previous session. So they're doing a lot better. They're able to comprehend what's going on here. They're taking the words, they're taking sentences, they're forming the equations necessary and able to solve them. Any issues with generally trying to maybe solve trying to solve individual questions. Okay. Again, it says, however, students should be warned that a typing error on a calculator produces an incorrect value and may lead to method marks on the awarded. So if they have got the calculators that can solve these simultaneous equations, yeah, they're not showing enough workings and guaranteed to get those method marks. So if they have got access to those calculators that can solve those equations, they should still show plenty of working out and just use those calculators to check their answers. Okay, so when students fail to gain any credit, it was often due to trying to solve just one equation at a time incorrectly or attempt to use trial and error, in which case no credit unless accurate are found. So, but this is rarer than before. So this was a good question. So now let's look at topics for focus. What can we do to help students do better next time? So for paper 1, the comprehension paper. These are the questions we can see from the marks that they weren't good. The mean marks. Overall, the mean mark was 59%. We can see these are lower. And we can see that our C and D graders didn't do so well. So we've got question 2A was calculating an estimate of standard deviation. We'll talk more about that in a minute. 4A was for writing an Excel formula for a 3-point average. So it's important that they do know how to, type Excel formulas. We have got that the reading curve was also something that they need to work on. Question 8, using summary statistics to find a regression line and commenting on suitability. And question 10, recognizing an exponential function and estimating the gradient using a tangent. So again, these weren't done particularly well. We'll look at some of those questions and also some responses. And again, for every single question, whether it's the ones that did well or the ones that did badly, making sure the mark scheme, if you look at the mark schemes very carefully, they will tell you which methods are valid, which are not valid for that particular situation. So always make sure the mark scheme is followed. If you've got any questions about the mark schemes, you can contact the subject advisors and they can get back to you about any other questions you've got. So paper 1, 2A, this is the one about the standard deviation. So the comment from the examiner was, despite the formula being provided, so we've got to remember the formula is provided in the exam, many candidates were unable to extract it for use. Okay, of those who did, many did well. However, there were some candidates not using them correctly. The errors normally came in the calculation of the fx squared, with candidates often finding fx all squared instead. So they only gain you 1 mark. So yeah, we've got a nice table provided for us, making sure that I practice this skill quite a lot. Down the bottom, we've got the mark traits. So this is exactly the proportions that got each mark. Okay, so we can see for each mark here, we look at the C grade students, 0.7 we're getting the first mark, but after that, only sort of like, between 30 and 40% we're getting the remaining marks. Also, it's quite important to see that in part B, the M3 and M4 were better performed than the A1. So it shows that candidates were able to continue with the question and gain marks even if they had made early mistakes. Okay, so there's always these restart points. If they don't get certain marks, they can then later on gain more marks. So let's look at response. See there working out there. And part A, there's no midpoint column, but the M1 is awarded for finding at least 2 products. So, it's implied from the 225 times 25 there, that mark's been given. The second method mark is, in this case, awarded for finding at least 2 products, the fx squared with an interval, and there's values of 5,625 and 90,600 are enough to award that mark. Again, worth noting that any work crossed out and not replaced can still be marked. The next method mark is dependent on the previous method mark. This for the full method and is not awarded here. So they didn't get this method mark. The value used n in this example is 4 and not 42. This was a common misconception. Most students think the value of n is a number of groups, not the actual number of data points. The final A1 cannot be awarded as the answer is incorrect. So they only scored 2 out of 4. Here we've got question 4A from paper 1. This is the one about Excel. So the comments from the examiner is, in part A, candidates were required to write a formula for a cell on a spreadsheet. So it's important they understand the different formulas and how to input a formula into a spreadsheet. So the majority understood the mathematics behind a formula, so could maybe write the formula, but they weren't necessarily able to gain all the marks because they might have been missing out certain technical areas, such as using the slash rather than divide and making sure there's an equal sign. Okay, they could also use the formulas such as the sum or the average formulas in Excel as well to gain some marks. But yeah, most of the marks being lost were because they weren't using the correct symbol and weren't putting the equal sign in. And again, we've got the trait data there. You can see that only 50% getting the first method mark for the sort of C and Ds. Not many, even the A grades were getting the final accuracy mark. This was question 8A and C. So we've got, again, you have to use data from table 5 in the source booklet, which you've got access to if you want to click the links. We've got to write an equation in that form. We've got our summary data. We need to show that A is negative 2687 and B is 1.34. Part A, and then part C, we have to then comment on the suitability. So part A, candidates had to use the equation, the regression line to show the given values for A and B. Finding B was normally successful. Most finding that. The process to find A proved more difficult, and that's where marks are being lost. It came down to candidates dividing by 12 to find the mean rather than 10. For part C, they were required to use the figure support their answer. Many did not. So this is all about making sure they read questions carefully to ensure they're meeting the criteria fully. Let's now look at question 10. So here we've got a graph showing advertising revenue over years. For part A, they had to describe what a function this could be. And then in part B, they have to estimate a gradient and then write in context what that gradient represents. Again, this is a GCSE topic, so hopefully most students will be familiar with them. If they were foundation students, they might not be familiar with exponential graphs. They can also use things such as geometric or growth functions, I think may have also been permitted. For part B, this is about drawing a tangent. So they've got to make sure they draw a tangent and find the gradient. And then for part 2 of that, it's about using the phrase rate of change. Okay, so getting students used to articulating their maths is important. So practicing finding gradients and drawing tangents and make sure they can articulate what that actually means is important. I have an example here. So they've written standard deviation for the first one, so they didn't quite understand what the graph was. And then for part B, they've drawn a tangent, so they get 1 mark, but the method is not complete or correct, and therefore the answer is not correct. And then part 2 is not incorrect. There's no context. It's actually, there needs to be a context. So they've said the change in the y-axis for you. That's just what the gradient is. It's not what it represents in this particular context. So we need to see some relevance to advertising revenue, etc. So that student only gets 1 mark out of 5. Let's now look at paper 2. We're looking at question 1, which is commenting on reliability of estimation scatter graph, understanding the mean of response variables. So we had some good stuff about the scatter graph, but we also had some bad stuff about the scatter graph question. We've got question 5, A part 3, C part 2, and C part 3, which is again that Venn diagram question. So this is about the set notation and conditional probability. And question 11, which was a linear program question. Again, we can see the schools there. Looking at the C grade students, not great proportions there. So here's question 5. We've got the trait data as well. So we know that they did fairly well on completing the Venn diagram, but when they had to find the probability of conditional probability and understand what the set notation was for part 3 earlier on, that's why they didn't do too well. So it was poorly attempted, part A, part 3. Very few correct responses seen. Again, lots of mixing up union intersect signs. For part C, the actual concept of probability would be covered GCSE. They wouldn't necessarily have seen the symbol. Those students, who weren't used to that sort of notation, struggled. We look at question 11, which is a linear programming problem. We've got the grid to plot the lines. We need to be showing the constraints from the information and explain what the third constraint means in context. Part B is right inequality for each 2 constraints shown. Part C is then drawing those lines and labeling the feasible region. And then we have to use that to find the maximum total sales. So picking out a few things from this is quite a large amount of information there. So generally the underlying stuff is what I'm going to mention here. So when students gain no credit, it was often due to trying to solve inequalities either individually or simultaneously. So that is generally where they were making mistakes. Very few students were able to correctly interpret the third constraint in context, with the majority given the description for a strict inequality rather than a complete description, whilst a small number confused the definitions of X and Y variables. For part B, many were not able to write the equation of the 2 lines shown in the grid as inequalities at all, and blank responses were more frequent than expected. And lastly, drawing the constraints on the grid to find the feasible region was a challenge for most, with only the more able students being able to gain 4 marks. Just another thing that I mentioned at the end, it was also pleasing to note that other methods were used to calculate a fully correct answer without using the grid and best method, meaning students gaining no marks in part C were not automatically excluded from gaining credit in part D. So they could still get some marks in part D if they, gain no marks in part C. We have the mark traits for that question here. Candidates were still able to gain the B mark in part B after errors in the previous stuff. So You see the B mark in part B is higher there. So even if they made mistakes in part A. You see the M3 and accuracy marks in part C are very low. So linear programming is definitely a topic to focus on. Okay, so now I've got a few notes of advice from the exam report. So we need to make sure students are reading questions carefully. Lots of errors is coming from, misinterpreting what the question wants. Also, if they've got to explain things, if they've got to talk about context, if they've got to talk about what certain mathematical ideas mean, we need to make sure they're practicing what that is. So talking about rates of change, etc. They need to be able to articulate themselves mathematically. There are formulae provided, and it's common to see students not knowing how to use those formulae properly or forgetting they actually exist. So make sure students are aware of what formula are in the exam, how to use them, practice using those regularly. I've mentioned context as well, so making sure they know how to add context. Think about adding units, talking about what that represents. Complex set notation, something to work on. That linear program question called problem. So plotting line graphs to represent inequalities, and also making sure they're not relying too heavily on the use of calculators. They've got to make sure they're showing intermediate steps. If they do everything on the calculator and don't show any working out and get a slight error, they can lose lots and lots of marks. So the mark schemes will be very, very clear as to what is expected. So make sure you're referring to mark schemes carefully, looking at exactly what previous exams are wanting in terms of method marks, making sure you're making the students aware of that. So here are the grade boundaries. So I've put the 2022-23. There were still some adjustments in 2022-23 as a result of the pandemic. So they're sort of affected by that in some respects. But we can see last summer's grade boundaries there, and we can see the performance. Okay, so now let's talk about what we can do to support. So the Maths Emporium is the main place to find lots and lots of resources, as I'm sure you will know. We've got a core maths in context cabinet, and in there's many things you can use. So we have got the teaching and learning materials. So there's lots of comprehension practice materials. There's also the linked pair pilot textbook chapters available. There's the source booklets and support of that. And we have lots of topic-based worksheets and practice questions. So you can access those from these links. So for example, the topic-based worksheet. So there's a long list of worksheets available, and there'll be files that have a worksheet. There's also one that's got the worksheet with some worked examples as well. Okay, and we've got links to some of the ones that, based on the areas of focus, that you can go straight to. So standard deviation, linear programming, conditional probability, you can use these links to access those straight away. There's also lots of professional development materials available. So if you're new to teaching maths in context, or you want to brush up on a few things to see what the differences are, access the folder from the link at the top. For every topic, we have got a video with teaching ideas and watch examples, a bit of transcript of the video as well. There's teacher notes, including useful links for the teaching of each topic. There'll be a worksheet which will include exam style questions. So have a look at any of those, and also you can find the videos on the Pearson playlist there. Got some examples from the linear programming video there. We also have plans for a live marking guidance event. So we would like to run a session that is as useful as possible for you to support with your marking and help, see what the mark schemes are like. When would it be best to live the session? So when do you do your mocks? So, it'd be great if you could put in the chat now, we'll give you some time to do that, when you do your mocks, so that we can work out when it'll be best to run this session. So if you put in when the mocks are done or when you think would be a good time to do the session, that would be great. So if you can put some things in the chat now. So also we have schemes of work and mappings from the other courses. So again, the link there available. So we've got what maps from GCSE and A levels, and we've also got access to the mapping from the Pearson project book, and the schemes of work that you can follow. The schemes of work will include lots of different links and advice as well. We've got our cabinets, including our past papers and mark schemes. We also have the exam reports and exemplars. And following the feedback from teachers, we've changed the format of our exemplars so they're now in PowerPoint format. So they can be used in front of the class or for teacher CPD. It still includes question performance figures, student responses with 3 examples responses, with the examiner comments, detailing exactly what marks were and were not awarded. So the same information is provided. You just look a little bit different. You can access the June 2024 exam reports and exemplars from that link there. We've also got brand new enhanced QLA. Okay, so that's available again in that particular cabinet and via this link. So I'll just explain a bit more about that. So the spreadsheets have been designed to have no macros because we're aware that school systems have security settings that sometimes prevent the use of macros. The question scores are related to are rated as red, amber, and green. The cells are highlighted purple if the number of marks entered is higher than the number of marks in the question. Okay. The data is then summarized for the teachers for both papers. Teachers can add a target in, and it will summarize how many are on, above, or below target. An overall grade will only appear once the data is entered for all exams. The grade can also be adjusted if the teachers adjust the questions for internal mocks. All the data is then, once it's entered in the sheet, is automatically pulled into individual student feedback sheets, where a student can see question by question their performance compared to how students performed in the actual live series. And because we know that there can be pressure in schools to avoid colour printing, we've got these arrows that also show whether they've done well or not. So they're available to use, brand new. So please, look at those. So if you have any other questions, please contact the subject advisors, and you can use the links there to find the subject advisor that you require, and also you can look out for news and updates. You can also find out more about our Professional Development Academy Plenty of different CPD opportunities there. And please don't forget that following the event, you're going to receive invitation to share your thoughts about the session. We really want your feedback, so please make sure you complete that. Let us know exactly what you like and what you think can be improved. So thank you very much for joining us. That's the end of the session.